Marry me, just for 6 months.
You don't even know me.
I know enough.
This isn't a fake marriage anymore, is it?
No, it never was.
Victoria Hayes had the kind of life most people only dreamed about. At 38, she was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing companies in Chicago, lived in a beautiful penthouse overlooking the city, drove a car that turned heads wherever she went, and wore clothes that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Wherever Victoria walked, people stood up. Wherever she spoke, people listened, but every night when she returned home, there was no one waiting for her, no warm voice asking how her day went, no family sitting around the dinner table, just a quiet apartment, a cold kitchen, and a phone filled with business messages. Money had given Victoria almost everything except the one thing she secretly wanted most, a person she could trust. She had learned that lesson the hard way. 3 years earlier, she had been engaged to Marcus Reed, a successful businessman who seemed perfect on paper. Victoria believed he loved her, but she later discovered that Marcus had been using their relationship to get access to her company and her connections. When she ended the engagement, he walked away without even looking back. Since then, Victoria had built a wall around her heart. She told everyone she was too busy for love. She told herself she didn't need anyone, but deep down she was tired of pretending. Things became even harder when her father, Richard Hayes, called her one evening and told her that the board was becoming nervous about the company's future. "The investors want stability," he said, "and they don't see you as stable." Victoria almost laughed. Since when does being single make someone a bad CEO? Her father paused before saying something that made her blood run cold. "They want you married before the next board meeting." Victoria refused immediately. She wasn't going to marry a stranger just to make wealthy investors comfortable. That same evening, needing to clear her head, she stopped at a small neighborhood restaurant far from the expensive places she normally visited. That's where she noticed Daniel Carter. He wasn't dressed like the men she usually met. His jacket was worn, his shoes were old, and he looked exhausted. But what caught Victoria's attention wasn't his appearance. It was the little girl sitting beside him. Daniel patiently helped his daughter with her homework while eating a simple dinner. When the waitress accidentally spilled a drink near their table, Daniel didn't complain. He simply smiled and said, "It's okay, these things happen." Victoria watched him quietly. She had met hundreds of rich and powerful men, but she had never seen someone with so little act with so much kindness. She didn't know it yet, but that tired single father was about to change her life in a way no business deal ever could. The next morning, Victoria couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. She had no idea why a man she had only watched for a few minutes had stayed on her mind, but something about him felt different. Maybe it was the way he spoke to his daughter. Maybe it was the patience in his voice. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in years, Victoria had seen a man who wasn't trying to impress her. Daniel didn't know who she was. He didn't care about her money. He wasn't looking at her expensive watch or designer coat. He was simply focused on getting his daughter home safely. By lunchtime, Victoria had made a decision that even her closest assistant would have thought was crazy. She asked her assistant to find Daniel. A few hours later, she learned that his name was Daniel Carter, that he was a single father, and that he worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over his daughter's head. Victoria arranged to meet him at the same restaurant that evening. When Daniel walked in, he looked confused. "You wanted to see me?" he asked. Victoria nodded and pointed to the chair across from her. "Please, sit down." Daniel sat, but he kept looking at her carefully. "Is this about yesterday? If my daughter was bothering you, I'm sorry." Victoria shook her head. "No, this isn't about your daughter." She took a deep breath. "I have a strange request, and I need you to hear me before you say no." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Victoria placed a folder on the table. "I want you to marry me." Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. "Excuse me." Victoria leaned forward. "Not a real marriage, a temporary one, 6 months. We would live together, attend certain events, and appear to be a normal married couple." Daniel stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," she replied. "I know you're responsible, I know you love your daughter, and I know you don't treat people differently because of their money." She explained everything, the investors, the board, her demanding father, and the pressure surrounding her company. Then she told him what she was willing to pay. The amount was enough to clear his debts, secure a better home for his daughter, and give him a fresh start. Daniel looked down at the contract but didn't touch it. "So you want to buy yourself a husband?" he asked quietly. Victoria's face tightened. "That's not what this is." Daniel looked directly into her eyes. "Then what is it?" For the first time in years, Victoria didn't have a perfect answer. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel pushed the contract back toward her. "I'm sorry, Ms. Hayes, but my daughter and I aren't for sale." Victoria watched him stand. She thought the conversation was over, but before Daniel walked away, she heard herself whisper, "Please, just give me one chance to explain." And for some reason, Daniel stopped. Daniel stood beside the table, his hand resting on the back of the chair, while Victoria looked up at him with a nervousness he had never expected to see from someone like her. She was the woman who could walk into a boardroom and make 20 executives go silent, yet right now she looked like someone who was afraid of hearing the wrong answer. Daniel slowly sat back down. "Fine," he said. "Explain it." Victoria took a breath and told him everything. Her investors believed she was too focused on work and had no stable personal life. Her father had already started pushing a wealthy businessman named Marcus toward her, hoping she would marry him and strengthen the company's position. Victoria didn't love Marcus and she didn't trust him. She believed he wanted her company more than he wanted her. The board meeting was only weeks away, and if she couldn't convince the investors that she had control of her personal life, she could lose support for the biggest expansion in the company's history. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at the contract again. "And you think pretending to be married will fix all that?" Victoria nodded. "For 6 months. After that, we walk away, no questions, no drama." Daniel gave a small laugh. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one bringing a child into this." Victoria's expression softened. "I know, that's why I chose you." Daniel frowned. "You chose me because I'm desperate enough to take the money." Victoria quickly shook her head. "No, I chose you because of what I saw yesterday. You were kind when nobody was watching. You treated that waitress with respect. You made your daughter laugh even though you looked exhausted. I've spent years surrounded by people who smile because they want something from me. You didn't even know who I was." Daniel became quiet. Those words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent years working, struggling, and trying to give his daughter a good life after her mother left. He didn't have much, but he had always promised himself that he would never let money turn him into someone he wasn't. He looked at Victoria and asked, "What happens when the 6 months are over?" Victoria hesitated. "We go our separate ways." Daniel nodded slowly, then he surprised her. "I don't want your money." Victoria blinked. "What?" Daniel pushed the contract back. "If I agree to this, it won't be because you paid me to pretend I'm your husband." Victoria stared at him. "Then why would you agree?" Daniel leaned forward and said quietly, "Because I know what it's like to be alone." Victoria's eyes filled with emotion. Daniel continued, "But I'm not going to pretend to love you. If you want someone beside you, I'll be honest with you, protect your dignity and treat you like a person. Nothing more, nothing less." Victoria couldn't speak. For the first time, someone had looked past her money, her title, and her power. And somehow, that simple response left the lonely CEO completely speechless. 3 days later, Daniel signed the agreement, but he made one thing very clear to Victoria. His daughter, Lily, would never be treated like part of a business deal. Victoria promised him she understood. Their fake marriage began quietly, but the first real test came when Daniel and Lily moved into Victoria's luxury home. Lily stood in the massive living room with her little backpack hanging from one shoulder, looking around at the marble floors and huge windows. "Daddy, are we really staying here?" she whispered. Daniel smiled. "Just for a little while, sweetheart." Victoria watched from across the room, unsure how to act around a child who had already made her uncomfortable in the strangest way. She had spent years building companies, but she had no idea how to build a relationship with a little girl. That evening, Victoria's father arrived without warning. Richard looked Daniel up and down before giving a cold smile. "So this is the man." Daniel calmly shook his hand. "Nice to meet you." Richard barely returned the gesture. "I hope you understand what you're getting yourself into." Daniel didn't argue, he simply said, "I understand." At dinner, the tension became even worse. Richard asked Daniel about his job, his income, and his family. Every question sounded like an insult. Daniel answered honestly and never lost his temper. Victoria finally snapped, "Dad, enough." Richard pushed his chair back. "I'm protecting you." After he left, Victoria apologized. Daniel shrugged. "I've dealt with worse." Later that night, Victoria found Daniel in the kitchen making pancakes for Lily. He was laughing while Lily tried to flip one herself. Victoria stood in the doorway and watched them. For the first time in years, her home didn't feel empty. Daniel looked over and smiled. "Want one?" Victoria smiled back. "Sure." She sat beside them, and something small but important changed that night. The marriage was supposed to be fake, the house was supposed to be temporary, the family dinner was supposed to be an act. But as Victoria listened to Daniel and Lily laughing together, she quietly wondered how long she could keep pretending that this strange little family didn't already feel real. The weeks that followed were nothing like Victoria had expected. At first, she and Daniel treated their marriage like a business arrangement. They agreed on what to say in public, when to hold hands, and which family events they needed to attend together. But little by little, the lines between pretending and reality began to disappear. One rainy evening, Victoria came home after a terrible day at work and found Daniel in the kitchen cooking dinner with Lily. The apartment was filled with the smell of warm food and the sound of Lily laughing. Daniel looked up and said, "Long day." Victoria nodded, kicked off her shoes and sat at the table. Nobody asked about profits or investors. Nobody wanted anything from her. Daniel simply placed a plate in front of her and said, "Eat before you start solving the whole world again." Victoria laughed. She couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to her that way. Soon, these small moments became normal. Daniel started picking Lily up from school while Victoria sometimes joined them for dinner. On weekends, they watched movies together, argued over what pizza to order, and laughed at things that had nothing to do with money. One night, Lily fell asleep on the couch between them. Daniel gently covered her with a blanket, and Victoria watched him with a soft smile. "You're a good father," she whispered. Daniel looked at her. "She's my whole world." Victoria looked away because she suddenly felt something she hadn't planned for. She was falling for him. Daniel felt it too, but he tried to hide it. He knew the contract had an ending date, and he didn't want to build dreams around something that was supposed to be temporary. Then came the moment that changed everything. At a charity dinner, Victoria's hand slipped naturally into Daniel's. There were cameras everywhere, but neither of them noticed. Daniel looked down at their hands, then at Victoria. She smiled. For once, neither of them was acting. Later that night, Daniel quietly asked Victoria, "Are we still pretending?" She stared at him, unable to answer. They both knew the truth. Somewhere between the fake smiles, family dinners, and ordinary moments, something real had grown. And now they were both terrified of what would happen when the contract finally ended. Just when Victoria and Daniel were starting to forget that their marriage was supposed to be fake, Marcus Reed came back into Victoria's life. He arrived at the company one Monday morning wearing an expensive suit and the same confident smile Victoria remembered too well. He claimed he had returned to help with the upcoming expansion, but Victoria knew better. Marcus had a way of making everything sound like a business opportunity. "You look happy," he said when he saw her. "I didn't think that was possible." Victoria's smile disappeared. "What do you want, Marcus?" He glanced toward Daniel, who had come to pick her up. "I heard you got yourself a husband." Daniel shook his hand politely, but Marcus's eyes immediately moved over his worn jacket and simple car. "Interesting choice," he said with a smirk. Daniel said nothing. Over the next few days, Marcus started planting doubts around Victoria. He told her father that Daniel was only with her because of the money. He showed Richard Daniel's financial records, his debts, and the fact that he had struggled to pay his bills before meeting Victoria. Soon, Richard confronted Victoria. "I warned you," he said. "That man saw an opportunity and took it." Victoria defended Daniel, but a small part of her became afraid. That evening, Daniel accidentally overheard Marcus talking to Richard in the hallway. "Give me a little time," Marcus said. "Once Victoria gets rid of that fake husband, she'll need someone she can trust." Daniel froze. He suddenly understood what Marcus wanted. It wasn't Victoria's heart, it was her company. Daniel could have walked away, but instead he chose to protect her. The next morning, Marcus cornered him outside the office. "You know this marriage isn't real," Marcus said. "Take the money and disappear." Daniel looked him straight in the eyes. "I don't need your money," Marcus laughed. "Then what do you need?" Daniel answered quietly, "For you to stay away from her." Marcus's smile vanished. He realized Daniel wasn't the weak man he had assumed. But what neither man knew was that someone had been listening to their conversation from inside the building, and that person was about to expose Marcus's real plan. The night of the biggest business event of Victoria's career finally arrived, and the entire room was filled with powerful investors, company leaders, and members of the press. Victoria walked in beside Daniel, holding his arm as cameras flashed around them. For a few minutes, everything seemed perfect. Daniel leaned toward her and whispered, "You okay?" Victoria smiled. "I'm fine now." She wasn't pretending anymore. Having Daniel beside her made her feel stronger, but across the room, Marcus was watching them carefully. He had spent days searching for a way to destroy Daniel, and tonight he finally believed he had found it. During dinner, Marcus suddenly stood up and asked for everyone's attention. "Before this company makes its next major decision, I think the investors deserve to know the truth about Victoria's marriage." The room became silent. Victoria's face changed. Marcus held up a copy of the agreement Daniel had signed months earlier. "This marriage is fake," he announced. Whispers spread across the room. Cameras turned toward Victoria and Daniel. Someone asked, "Is that true?" Victoria stood frozen. Daniel immediately stepped forward, but Marcus continued. Daniel Carter was paid to pretend to be her husband. This wasn't love, it was a business arrangement. The room erupted with questions. Victoria's father looked furious. Several investors began whispering among themselves. Marcus smiled, believing he had won. How can anyone trust a CEO who lies to her own investors? He asked. Victoria finally found her voice. Yes, the marriage started as an arrangement. The room became even quieter, but what happened after that was real. Marcus laughed. Real, he was paid to be here. Daniel looked at Victoria, then at the crowd. He could have defended himself, but he knew this was no longer about money. She's right, he said. I agreed to a contract, but I stayed long after I had every reason to leave. The room fell silent. Victoria looked at him with tears in her eyes. Then Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out something unexpected. And if you want the whole truth, he said, looking directly at Marcus, you need to see what I found. Marcus's face suddenly went pale. He knew exactly what Daniel was holding, and he realized his own secret was about to come out. Daniel slowly pulled a small folder from inside his jacket and placed it on the table in front of everyone. The room was so quiet that Victoria could hear the cameras clicking. Marcus stared at the folder, and for the first time that night, the confident smile disappeared from his face. Daniel looked at the investors and said, Yes, I signed a contract with Victoria. I'm not going to lie about that, but Marcus forgot to tell you something. He opened the folder and handed the documents to the nearest investor. Inside were copies of emails and financial records showing that Marcus had secretly been trying to buy shares in Victoria's company through another business. He had also been pressuring several investors to remove Victoria from her position so he could take control of the expansion deal. The room erupted in whispers. Marcus quickly stepped forward. Those documents are fake. Daniel didn't move. Then explain the bank transfers. Another investor looked at the records and asked Marcus about several payments made to people connected to the board. Marcus couldn't answer. Victoria stared at Daniel, shocked. She suddenly understood what he had risked to protect her. Daniel hadn't needed to do any of this. He could have taken the money from their original agreement, walked away, and gone back to his quiet life with Lily. Instead, he had spent days investigating Marcus because he knew Victoria was being targeted. Then Daniel turned toward Victoria. I never wanted your money, he said softly. I could have left the moment people started calling me a gold digger. I could have taken the money and disappeared. But I stayed because somewhere along the way you stopped being part of a contract. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Daniel continued, You became someone I cared about. And I couldn't stand there and watch someone destroy you. Victoria walked toward him. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. Daniel smiled sadly. Because I didn't want you to think I was doing it to earn your love. That sentence broke the last wall around Victoria's heart. She reached for his hand in front of everyone. You already have it, she said. Daniel looked at her, stunned. Victoria took a shaky breath. I don't care what the contract says anymore, I love you. Daniel's eyes softened, but he didn't immediately answer. He looked toward Lily, who was standing near the doorway with a smile on her face. Then he looked back at Victoria. I love you too, he finally said. The room went silent again, but this time nobody was judging them. They were witnessing something the contract could never create. A fake marriage had started with money, pressure, and fear, but Daniel had just sacrificed the easiest way out because he had found something worth staying for, real love and a family he never expected to have. The next morning, Victoria walked into the company headquarters knowing that everything had changed. The boardroom was filled with investors, executives, and her father, Richard, all waiting to see what she would do. Marcus was gone, and the evidence Daniel had presented had already been turned over to the authorities and the company lawyers. But Victoria still had one decision left to make. Her father stood as she entered. Victoria, think carefully. You can still protect the company. End this relationship, distance yourself from Daniel, and the board may forget what happened. Victoria looked at him calmly. For most of her life, she had followed other people's expectations. She had built the company they wanted, dated the men they approved of, and hidden every weakness behind a perfect smile. But that morning, she was done living for everyone else. Dad, she said, I'm not ending my relationship with Daniel. Richard shook his head. He's not from our world. Victoria smiled sadly. That's exactly why I trust him. She turned toward the board. Yes, our marriage began as an agreement, I won't hide that, but Daniel never used me, he never asked for more money. When he had every reason to walk away, he stayed. One investor asked, Are you willing to risk your position for him? Victoria didn't hesitate. I'm willing to risk my position for the truth. The room became quiet. Then she placed her resignation letter on the table. Everyone stared at her. If loving someone honestly costs me my title, then I'll accept that cost. Richard's expression softened for the first time. He finally understood that his daughter wasn't throwing her life away, she was choosing it. Suddenly, one of the senior investors stood up. "Victoria, you don't need to resign." He explained that after reviewing Marcus's scheme, the board had decided to keep Victoria as CEO. The room slowly filled with applause. Victoria looked toward Daniel, who was standing near the door with Lily. He smiled, but she walked straight toward him. "You don't have to wait for the contract to end," she whispered. "I already know what I want." Daniel smiled. "And what's that?" Victoria took his hand. "A real marriage." For the first time, there was no contract between them, no business deal, and no reason to pretend. Just two people choosing each other. 6 months after that unforgettable night, Victoria's life looked completely different. Her company was stronger than ever, but she no longer measured her happiness by business deals, expensive cars, or the number of people waiting for her in a boardroom. She had something money could never buy: a real family. Daniel and Lily were no longer temporary guests in her home. They had become the heart of it. The three of them had created a simple routine that Victoria once thought she would never have. Breakfast together in the morning, school runs, family dinners, movie nights, and little arguments about who was going to choose the movie. Sometimes Victoria would come home exhausted, only to find Lily waiting at the door with a hug. Daniel would be in the kitchen, pretending he wasn't worried about dinner burning. Those ordinary moments meant more to Victoria than anything she had ever owned. One quiet evening, Daniel took Victoria back to the small restaurant where they had first met. The same place where she had once asked a struggling single father to become her fake husband. They sat at the same table, but this time there was no contract between them. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Do you remember what you asked me that night?" Victoria smiled. "I asked you to marry me." Daniel laughed softly. "For 6 months. Victoria shook her head. "I was scared." Daniel looked into her eyes. "So was I." He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring box. Victoria's eyes widened. "Daniel," he smiled. "This time I don't have a contract, I don't have a deal, I don't have a reason to ask except that I love you." He opened the box. "Victoria Hayes, will you marry me for real?" Tears filled her eyes as she laughed and nodded. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." A few weeks later, they stood together at a small wedding surrounded by family and close friends. Lily walked down the aisle before Victoria, smiling proudly as she carried the rings. When Victoria finally reached Daniel, he whispered, "No more pretending." She smiled through her tears. "Never again." And as they exchanged their vows, Victoria realized something she had spent years searching for. Love had never been waiting in a boardroom or hidden inside a business deal. It had been sitting across from her in a small restaurant, wearing an old jacket, raising a little girl, and asking for nothing except honesty. What began as a fake marriage became the most real thing in both their lives, a family built not by money or status, but by two people who finally chose each other.